Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another season of Line Change, the NHL betting podcast from the Action Network. My name is Michael Lieboff, and joining me for this season once again is Nick Martin. Nick, I think this is our third season together. I think fourth season for Line Change overall. Very excited. And I think that the theme for this season is a little different from previous ones in the NHL since COVID, I would say, since the bubble. For the first time, I think the more important thing isn't who got better, but how many teams actually got worse. And we'll get into that as we get into our bets and preview for the Eastern Conference. This will be the Eastern Conference episode. We'll do a Western Conference preview as well. Go team by team, give out bets. We're going to do an awards betting special with Jake Hahn of SiriusXM NHL Radio as well. And then we'll get started. The season begins in Europe on October the 4th. So not too much longer now. We are recording this on Monday, September 23rd, just for transparency purposes, in case there's something that happens between now and when it gets released on Thursday that we couldn't possibly have foreseen. But anyways, Nick, let's get started. We'll start in the Atlantic Division with the Florida Panthers, defending Stanley Cup champions. They're plus 235. They are the favorites. The Leafs are the second favorite at plus 270. Then a little bit of a jump to the Bruins at 5-1. Tampa Bay Lightning plus 550. The Sens are 12-1. The Wings also 12-1. Sabres 14-1. The Habs are 75-1. I will start with the Panthers, but just also overarching thoughts here on the Atlantic before we go team by team. What are you thinking about this division?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a dogfight. I think that's kind of going to be the, consensus take, but it seems like the Sabres could push, the Senators should push. I think the Habs are going to be sneaky good. And I know a lot of people are still thinking the Wings could break through here. I'm not quite as high on them. And then I think there's arguments to be made for some of the top teams falling off a little bit. So I think it should stay competitive for quite a while and definitely offer us a pretty interesting season.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like the past few years now, it's a kind of a running joke that everyone's been waiting for the Sabres or Senators or Red Wings more recently to make that leap. And but really, it's just been a tale of two halves: the have-nots and the haves in the Atlantic. I think that's gone now. And famous last words. I do think the two of us, though, were throwing cold water on the Sabres, especially last year, and the Wings as well. Saying that the Big Four were probably just going to remain the Big Four. Maybe the Panthers would come down. We were obviously very wrong about that. This year, though, I do think this is a division that's 17 deep, 7 teams deep, and that gives me no reason to want to back the Panthers here. I think you can handle the Panthers the same way that we kind of did last year, which was almost want to bet against them right now with the prices that are out there, but if they show us what they showed us in the middle of last year, where it looked like this team was developing into a behemoth, then you'll maybe be able to catch a better number than what we're dealing with. But to me, great team, great coach, whole program looks like it's on stable footing, and I see no reason why it's just gonna like bottom out or they'll have a hangover. But as the division favorites, I've got nothing here because I think that there are just too many teams nipping at their heels.
Yeah, I don't want to bet them to win the division, and I don't really have a lot on the Panthers here. I think I'm seeing it like you. I think everyone knows they're going to get into the playoffs and be a threat again. But I also think the defense core could be a little shaky. We'll see. I think Maurice proved last year that they can plug some guys in there, and they got so much out of, people nobody was counting on, and that was why they ended up being so good. But I still think, Ekblad looks like he's falling off a bit. Nate Schmidt, we'll see how that goes. And then Boqvist is a guy I think has some upside. But I think that's enough flaws that in this division at this number with maybe a bit of a cup hangover or at least maybe a little complacency in the regular season, I am going to pass on everything Panthers.
Yeah, they got great goaltending from Anthony Stolarz last year behind Bob and Spencer. It'll be Spencer Knight with Bobrovsky this year, and we just don't know how that tandem will work. As we will say with a lot of goaltending. But so too many question marks. You win the Stanley Cup and you win it in the fashion that they did. You deserve to be the favorite. They are the conference favorite at plus 550 as well. But so I'm not arguing against it. It's just got no interest here. The Toronto Maple Leafs are the second favorite in the division, and this will end up being the first bet that we have coming on the board, and it belongs to you. Generally, you are higher on the Leafs than I am. So I'll say my thoughts and let you go first.
Yeah, I think the Leafs are a good bet to win the division at plus 280. They're the one out of those big four that I don't think is that likely to take a step back. I think first off, the goaltending could end up being a big issue, but I also think you look at it and Stolarz and Woll could easily be quite a good duo. They both were top 10 in goals saved above expected per 60 last season in a small sample for Woll. But I just think that compared to a lot of other teams' goaltending is not as likely to be a flaw as people are thinking. I think you have to like the Tanev addition. And then I feel really confident that we'll see all their big guys put up big years. I think Marner's a guy that I'm high on in fantasy, and I think he's going to put together a big regular season. So it's not even that I'm necessarily that high on the Leafs, but I kind of just like what they have left relative to the Panthers, Bruins, and Lightning. So I think that plus 280 is actually a pretty good number because in terms of the regular season, I feel pretty confident that they're really going to push and get out past 100 points here.
Yeah, as I said before, I really do think the theme here isn't about teams getting better, but teams getting worse. And the Panthers maybe not drastically got worse, but like you said, they've definitely added more question marks to their mix than they had and which is obvious to say about a team that just won the Stanley Cup. The Jeremy Swayman news with Boston obviously adds a really weird wrinkle to that situation. So then the Lightning, I think you can question, yeah, the Gensel move kind of helps like stabilize them up front, but who knows about that defense core? Vasilevsky's got to bounce back and be elite again if they want to have a chance to climb back towards like the 100-point team that they've been. So I don't disagree that I think like of those teams, right, the teams that everyone's kind of counting on to win the division, um, Toronto, Tampa, Boston, and Florida. At the moment, I think Toronto probably has the fewest question marks. I just don't think the number is good enough because the goaltending is it's a little off-putting that you are going into a season with a tandem like this. I'm trying to think about the last time it worked when a team kind of made this sort of bet. Like Philip Grubauer, I think it's maybe a little unfair to draw that comparison, but he's the one that keeps jumping to the front of my mind. Like he would put up great numbers as a backup. The Kraken kind of just commit to him, hand him the keys to the car, and just hasn't worked out. I do think the two Woll and Stolarz are good. They're good bets, but they're still bets, right? Like who knows if Woll can stay healthy, and Stolarz playing in a completely different environment with a different media market kind of raised expectations. A little frightening. And the other thing that I think is a little concerning if you're going to bet them at as short of a price is the left side of their forward group going Nyes, Domi, Robertson, or Pacioretty and Holmberg. That kind of group. I do think that their forward group just isn't as prolific as it has been in years past. That said, it's still really good, and it's still led by Marner, Matthews,
Yeah, I mean
Nylander, right?
those
Right. So
three of those guys are the clear third
right.
guy on those lines. So,
Yeah.
and
It's
I still think Robertson. We'll see. He's a guy that I think could go either way this year. It could be a disaster, but I also think he could have a really good season if he settles into a good role and gels with Brube.
yeah. All right, so that moves us on to Boston. And Boston was a team I really wanted to bet kind of across the board 6 weeks ago. I'm happy I didn't do it. In fact, the only bet I have now that's related to the Bruins is a bet on Eunice Corpusalo. Like I said, we'll talk about awards with Jake in a couple of days. But without Swayman, like I get the Bruins are really good at providing a platform for their goalie to succeed. But without Swayman, it becomes a really different kind of situation. And all that talk about Bruins culture, which I do actually buy into, it's been years and years and years that this team has just been really good and solid. And but it does kind of throw a wrench into that with Swayman. Don't call it a holdout, but it's a holdout right now. So I know you're going to go against the Bruins. I'm not there. I think that this team still finds a way to march towards second or third in the division, but definitely much more concerned about them than I was 6 weeks ago when I was really excited to like bet them as a 20 to 1-ish team in the Stanley Cup market.
Yeah, I'm fairly low on the Bruins. I think that they could easily end up missing the playoffs here, at least at plus 180. I think it's a good bet. Just with, I think the Sens are going to press really hard. We'll get to that. I think they let us down last year, but we'll see. And I think the Buffalo, there's a bit of a case to be made for them. I'm pretty low on Elias Lindholm, so I think if he doesn't bounce back and have a big year, you're looking at that offensive core, and it is not looking very good. Marchand's coming off some surgeries. I think same thing as a couple of years ago. We thought that that'd be something to sell on, but more and more, I feel like they have a lot of question marks there. And then I think the other argument that could really hurt them is if Korpisalo is bad. They've gotten the best goaltending in the league the last few years, especially when you consider what they've gotten out of each goaltender combined. And a big part of that, they have winning culture. They definitely play the right way, excellent defensively. But I still think there's definitely something to be said for how much worse the play of the backup could be this year compared to when basically no matter who was in the net, they were getting top 5 goaltending in the league. So I think that could really hurt their point total if Korpisalo is drastically worse than Ullmark was last year, which is pretty realistic. And then, yeah, like I said, I think the offensive core can fall off and a lot more push from the other teams in the division. So for me, I think that there's pretty good numbers out there to back them to miss the playoffs this season.
All right, that brings us to Tampa next. Really big story in the offseason with them losing Steven Stamkos, but also bringing in Jake Gensel. I think that's an upgrade for sure, especially 5-on-5. But it does, I think it has an effect on the team just generally. I also, looking beyond Point, Gensel, and Kucherov, I know Brandon Hagel's a great player. I know Nick Hall is a solid pivot. Anthony Cirelli, great two-way forward, but the supporting cast is really concerning outside of those guys, and they're banking on Cam Atkinson to have a bounce back year after a bunch of down years. Then it's players like Connor Sheary and Zemgus Girgensons, who had been in Buffalo for what seemed like decades and now is in Tampa. Fourth line center, it could be Luke Glendening. It's just it looks like an insane roster to me. Just like the way it's put together, and this was always coming with the way that this team has handled its salary cap and training draft capital, all that. So this was always coming. But it looks like you have an all-star team in like the top 6, and then the bottom 6 is just like a bunch of guys you throw on PTOs. The blue line also could be concerning. We both, I think, like JJ Mosier. But losing Sergachev in his minutes, although last year was a lost year with him with the injury. Now you're looking at a top 4 with Hedman, Mosier, Ryan McDonough, and Eric Chernak. Could be concerning with the way that Hedman's play has kind of gone up and down over the years. So I think a lot of people were looking to just buy right back into Tampa when they traded for when they signed Gensel. I'd pump the brakes here because, like Buffalo and Ottawa, everyone's kind of learned their lessons with these teams. I think everyone's like just discounting them, saying like we'll see it. We'll wait until we see it to actually like back them to rabble rouse their way into the top 4 of this division. But the top 4 has never been weaker than this group, I think, as a whole, collectively. And like you said, like the Leafs or the Panthers are probably the 2 best teams in the division, but even them, like they're not their best versions that we've seen of themselves since the bubble. And you could say the same thing about Tampa. We can obviously say the same thing about Boston. So that just waters down the top of the division a little bit and makes the path a lot easier for one of these other teams to finally gate crash their way in. I would bet that it's Tampa that comes down more than Boston. I'm not going to bet. The numbers aren't good enough, but that's the team that I'd be targeting if you're looking for Ottawa or Buffalo or Detroit, or if you really want to get a little crazy, Montreal to make their way into the playoffs. It's this team because I think that things go wrong in an NHL season for every team, and there's very few teams that I think can handle less things going wrong than this Tampa team. Like a couple of bad breaks or an injury, or Vasilevsky doesn't find his elite form, and they're in big trouble.
Yeah, I'm pretty much right with the market on Tampa. They had 98 points last year. Their total this year is 98.5. That seems pretty fair to me. If I had to bet, I'd say about 96. I just like their top forwards enough more so than Boston. So that's kind of where I land on liking them a little more. But yeah, even with the Gensel edition, it's a little thin. Hedman's really falling off. And then it's kind of been a quietly large sample of Vasilevsky being pretty, I don't want to say average, but not being what he was. And it feels like he's still getting a lot of credit. And then behind him, not much to offer. Like they could end up, I don't think they're going to want to do it, but they might end up playing Vasi 60 starts again or be forced to down the stretch. So I think there's definitely some questions there, but I don't really have anything in terms of a bet.
Yeah, it's why this isn't the team that went out why didn't they go out and get Kevin Lankinen? It's beyond me. You know, that's the type of thing that leaves your head scratching a little bit. Okay, let's get to the fun part of this division. I think you know, we were definitely higher on Ottawa than Buffalo last year, but we kind of just, and maybe I'm talking out of the wrong side of my body, but like I thought that what we basically said was like the error bars for Ottawa were so wide. Like we could have saw that team finally put it all together. They had signed Korpisalo if he had found a way to kind of to build on what he showed towards the end of his tenure in Columbus, and then with Los Angeles, perhaps they've finally settled the goaltending scenario. Young D comes together, and then things just started going wrong for them. Shane Pinto gets suspended for half a season, injury issues. They were never able to get off the mark. They were the Senators. Coach gets fired. All sorts of stuff happens. In a weird way, like I think it makes sense that everyone is handling them with oven mitts here and doesn't want to like be the one to put their neck on the line and say this is the year that the Senators finally make the leap. But I also don't think that, and I think part of that is because they didn't have a splashy offseason like they did the previous two, like when they got DeBrincat and Korpisalo, all that stuff. But I think that's good. Like I think that this team had the offseason that it needed to have to like take a step forward. The losing Chikrin and replacing Jensen, I actually don't think is like a huge, like it wasn't a great trade in terms of like long-term value, but I don't think it's like a huge deal in terms
Yeah.
of like the
I mean,
Senators' outlook this season.
based off what they actually got out of Chikrin last year, there's
Right.
not much of a drop. And then you talk about the offseason. Yeah. I mean, the move they made getting Allmark was pretty flashy. And
Yeah.
when you look at having the league's worst goaltending last year, that obviously raises the floor pretty tremendously if he plays anything like he did
Right.
in Boston. And I would never make the case that the Senators defended like Boston did last year, but I think it was still pretty clear how much their goaltending hurt them. And then, yeah, like you said, you lose Pinto for half the year. Josh Norris is, I mean, it's a scary bet if he's going to be able to stay healthy or not. But if he is, their top nine looks pretty stacked again. And I feel like I have to go in and buy on the Sens. I feel like my exact words on our pod last year might have been that I would bet them at anything better than even money to make the playoffs. This is definitely something close to that. And this year I'm seeing it the exact same way. There's
Yeah.
still plus 110 out there. And I think if you're getting better than 50-50, it's worth a bet. So,
Yeah.
and I also think while we're, on them here, I think that they are a team to target with some high upside bets too.
Yes.
Because I think there's definitely a world where this team could go off and be one of the best regular season teams.
That's where I'm going here. I think that, like you said, like they had the offseason they needed to have. They got Allmark. That's a big move, but I just don't think that they did like the kind of cosmetic things that they had been doing in previous years, like going to get DeBrincat and stuff and going to get Chikrin. Like this time they kind of just filled the holes, then shut things down, moved on. And it's not just about the Senators. It's the point I'm going to keep making in this division and the next division we talk about. The other teams didn't get, like, there's no team that they're chasing that I think put like 5 more points between them and Ottawa this offseason, right? By the additions that they made. I think the opposite has actually happened. I think the pack, the top of the division has come closer down to the pack. And if you look at Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo, and we can throw Montreal in there as well. This is like the team I think that has like the enough depth to withstand the storm. The bet I would make here, and it sounds crazy, and like you said, like I would forego you're much more into building yourself like a like a more stable portfolio with, bets in and around like even money or whatever for a full season, I like I'm going to go for it here and bet that this team has an opportunity to just put everything together and have one of those crazy seasons where they just run away. And I think betting Ottawa, if you can get like 75-1 on a President's Trophy, that's where I would look. I know most of the numbers are below that, but that's how you should be playing this team. Just play them with a lottery ticket, because there's every chance that this team can go off. Every chance, but there's also every chance that they just don't again. And we're left talking about it with the same dance, and we're lamenting that we believed in them again come January.
Yeah, I think a lot of people could be in that boat, but there's enough arguments, and the coaching too. I think there's definitely something to be said for the coaching change. Like, I don't want to say that I think Green is the perfect hire, but it does seem like that last year the room got lost a little bit, and when Martin came in, it was clearly just having someone try to sort things out, but not necessarily a guy who's likely to be the best coach in the NHL at this point in time. So I don't hate that they, have a new regime going here at all either.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's I think you can say it sort of feels like the Canucks a little bit last year.
100%. Yeah, I think that's a good comparison.
And if that's the case, the Canucks were contending for the top of the division and President's Trophy for a lot of the season last year. So I don't know, Ottawa. Like, I would need a bigger number. Maybe we get one in the first week of the season. A lot of times, like, these numbers kind of change that opening week, and I'm looking for as big number as possible to bet them to win the President's Trophy once again, because I just think that's the way to handle this team.
I was just gonna say, you can also do 100 points for plus 220. I think is not a bad option there either, if you kind of want something between that. The Presidents and something a little more reasonable. I think that's another good option.
Yeah, they're 12-1 to win the division, and I think that in my line of thinking here, and it's often not the right way to go about things, is if they're going to win this division, like, you can take a 5x the price on that, and go for the President's Trophy. So that's Ottawa, like I said, 12-1 to win the division. Detroit's also 12-1 to win the division. I think that this number is way off. Like, I think Detroit is clearly the 7th best team in this division going into the year, and I actually don't know if the gap between them and Montreal is all that wide for that spot. There's a lot of issues here for a team that some people are going to pump to make the playoffs. Top 6 is fine with Larkin, Raymond, DeBrincat. I know Patrick Kane had a bounce back year. JT Compher, I think, leaves a little bit to be desired as a second line center. Who knows what we get out of Tarasenko up there? The bottom 6 looks like an NHL bottom 6, fine. But then the blue line is not something I would be confident in. Mo Seider, Ben Sherratt, Simon Edvinsson, and Jeff Petrie going into a year as a top 4 feels a little scary. I know Seider certainly has, number 1 defenseman upside. He plays some really tough minutes, but then you're saddling him with Ben Sherratt, who I think most people would agree is not suited for that kind of role. Who, maybe Simon Edvinsson becomes the next big thing, but then you have Jeff Petrie, Oli Mata, and Eric Gustafsson routing out this unit. And then to make matters worse, like, the goaltending it's an absolute disaster in my mind. Cam Talbot, I'm going to list them all. Cam Talbot, Alex Lyon, Ville Husso, Jack Campbell, and Sebastian Cossa. And you and I were talking about this. Like, Cossa to me probably is the one, if you were just trying to optimize this team for the best chance to make the playoffs this season, I would go with Cossa in the NHL, because you kind of know what you're going to get out of the other guys, and it's not going to be great. Like, this, I think this thing could go really pear-shaped, and I actually don't hate a bet on Detroit to have the worst record in the NHL in a real long shot. 80, 100-1, you'll find out there, because I could see this thing getting really, really, really ugly.
Yeah, you're actually a little harder on them than I am. I'm kind of seeing them, like, appropriately priced, in my opinion. Like, I'm just not seeing them as a buy. I think that Tarasenko is just such a passenger now that that hurts them a little bit. I like Sider a lot. I think he got completely sewered last year. He had one of the hardest roles in the league, some of the worst defense uh, partners, and I think Wings fans would defend that. I think the Gustafson pickup was good, and I like Edvidson moving forward. So that kind of keeps me just in line with the market here. Like they're a team that I'm scared to just call out entirely because I think that they could come out and prove us wrong for sure. So yeah, I didn't really have any strong takes about the Wings here.
It's the goaltending that really freaks me out here more than anything, because they did play like decent team defense. Like they were really good at keeping things pretty low event last year in some important games too. Like they just wanted to grind out, 2-1, 3-2 games, and they got really good goaltending in spurts from Alex Lyon. But counting on that again and backing him up with a gaggle of Talbot, who I think is past it, Husso, who's hurt, and who knows what we're going to see out of him. Then Jack Campbell's, who of course we all thought was going to win the Vezina last year at 250-1, and the high upside guy in Kosa, who just hasn't played in the NHL yet. I don't know. There's enough here that I think a lot of things can go wrong. They're not my favorite wooden spoon bet, but if I had to pick one in the Eastern Conference, it would be Detroit. My favorite one is out west.
Yeah, I didn't really have one I liked out of the East either. I looked at that. And they were, I mean, you were almost favorable saying they did good to even be low event there. In the season's second half, they were like bottom 5, bottom 6 in pretty much every metric. Everyone is waiting on them to fall off. I think that, like we said, the decor could be a little better with Edvinsson taking on a bigger role in Gustafson. But yeah, the goaltending, I think, is the one question mark for me that's a little hard to get around.
That brings us to Buffalo. I think the Sabres they're 14-1 to win the division, I should say. They're right around the same price as Detroit and Ottawa in basically every market. They're the longest of the three, but it's not like crazy. They're 25-1 to win the conference. I don't believe in the upside as much compared to Ottawa, but I do think that Buffalo has less of a chance this season than Ottawa does to just go completely in the drain. And I would say that about Detroit and Buffalo as well. The Sabres, the goaltending, I think, is safe enough now with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Devon Levi to be confident that it's going to at least be NHL average. I'm expecting a bounce back from Tage Thompson. He was like 28-1 to win the MVP last year going into the season. He's now triple that price at most places to do so this year. I don't think that he's just like not going to be a really good player. Obviously, they had a down season from Dylan Cousins. He needs to bounce back. I just think that they've got enough kind of NHL depth to be an annoying team to play against this year, which is something that just they haven't been. And I think that goes on the D too. Obviously, Rasmus Dahlin is dealing with a little bit of injury. Doesn't seem like they're concerned. But a top four with him, Byram, Owen Power, and either Yoki Haru, Samuelson, Clifton. Like there's a good enough blue line here too. So I think that this team is like they have a high floor. I just don't know about the ceiling. So I honestly don't know what to make of them. I think that they're certainly good enough to like be right there, but it's so hard. This one's a lot harder for me to get behind than the Senators, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I'm not quite there on betting them as a team to do anything. I think that they could be surprisingly good, and I'm seeing it like you. The main bets that I like will go into the one, but I think Dahlin bounces back. I think that he could have a huge season. And like you said, I think Tage Thompson's a great guy to buy on. He was fighting that wrist injury all last year. I think everyone kind of knew it. And it's been kind of a common take, but Buffalo had the 4th worst power play last year. And I just think a unit with Dahlin at the top, Tage on one side. I think Peterka will probably be the shooter on the other side. You can put Jack Quinn out there. Whatever the unit is, I think that this could be one of the biggest changes in special teams year over year. I could see this being like a top 10 power play easily this next season. So I like Thompson and Dahlin in fantasy. I think they're both going to have big years. I think Thompson to score 40 goals at plus 180 is a solid bet. And yeah, I think the Sabres, I agree. I think they could be sneaky good. Like, you look at all the talent that could bounce back, and then I think Zach Benson could have a good year. JJ Paterka, I like a lot. And then everyone's kind of circling Jack Quinn as a guy to, maybe try and get as a sleeper in your fantasy leagues that could really go off. And I agree with that. So I don't mind the Sabres. I think the depth of the bottom six and the decor is still a little concerning, but if they get pretty good goaltending and they can, turn play in the right direction a little more than last season, I can definitely see the arguments for them, but kind of just neutral in terms of actually betting them to go over under their point total.
Yeah, and I would say this, like I would, if you're building, and this is a very niche bet, but something I like to do is like just build like a 1 or 2 division winner parlays before the season starts, and you're going to need one long shot in there to make it a worthwhile, I think, venture. I don't hate Buffalo at like 14-1 in that kind of bet to juice the ticket. You can then you pair them with Edmonton or Dallas, whoever, and then you're starting to get to prices that make it worthwhile. But yeah, I and this is why I think that this, like, my overarching prediction for this division itself is it's just going to look very different. I think it's the AL Central this year in baseball that's like it looks like it's from like 1999 or something, with Cleveland and Detroit's good, Kansas City's good again. I know Minnesota's like right there. I think that's what we're looking at, is like a very different mix 1 through 5 than we've seen in the past. So
yeah, and there's a lot of teams that kind of right out of the gates I'm going to be probably trying not to fade, and I think the Sabres will probably be one of them. I could see myself at least, not wanting to go against them as a fairly big dog. I think probably be on them a couple times at the start of the year, because I think it's one of those things we could just see this team be sneaky good right out of the gates. So I'm definitely kind of watching for that, and at least thinking going in, I don't want to fade them with prices that are like comparable to last year's Sabres sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a one of my favorite bets before every Premier League season is the team to be in first place at Christmas. That would be a fun little bet to be making for either Sabres or Senators. That brings us to Montreal, who's 75-1 to win the division, and are kind of getting lost in the shuffle here. Like I said, I actually don't think there's a huge gap between them and Detroit, and I think that they've closed the gap between them and the rest of the division as well. My favorite bet with the Canadiens we'll talk about during our awards preview, but I'm pretty into their goaltending. Sam Montembeault, I think the defense obviously has to do a better job in front of him for that bet to have legs. I don't know, man. I keep closing my eyes and picturing myself around Thanksgiving kicking myself for not backing this team more. But the one concern for me is, like, I don't know if I trust Marty St. Louis to get them into like X's and sharp enough on X's and O's and defensive structure and all that stuff to make good on what they have. So I don't know. Is it just one? Am I just 1 year too early, or am I actually going to be regretting not backing this team going into this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think they can be really scrappy. I don't know if I even necessarily am low on St. Louis either. Like, he's been working with a pretty tough defense core. I think that they're putting a lot of weight. Like, it looks like Lane Hudson is just going to have to be a top 4 defender, which I don't think is an insane bet, but that's kind of one point that could be a big change. Like, you look at that right now, their projected top 4 is probably Hudson and David Savard, who's definitely not good in that role anymore. I think there's some guys that could really make this team scrappy. We'll see what they get out of Line. Should be very motivated. Could obviously go either way there. But I kind of just have them with Buffalo as like a team that out of the gates, I'm not going to be fading
Right.
like opening night when they're playing Toronto for whatever. And it feels like that game's always competitive. But just for example,
overtime,
yeah, exactly. Like, that's just one right out of the gates where, like, I don't want to bet against this Montreal team. And it feels like the league at the start always does. Like, you do see some of these teams like the Ducks and whoever it always is
Right.
just comes out like 7-2. and people get into these situations where they're thinking like the top is going to push back right away, and it takes a little time to settle in. So yeah, I think Montreal is the upside to be scrappy. I thought there was some value backing Caulfield to get 30 goals and 40 goals. And people, I've never seen like a player market like that on the NHL move so much. People have just been pounding it. So I did post that in there. I think that Caulfield could bounce back or just have a bigger year. But now I'm a little over that. The one fear for me too is it's kind of a weird fit with him and Laine both wanting to go on that left side on the top power play. So I did post that. I think it was a great bet, but at this point, I'm not on it anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is the type of team where, like, if you, and obviously it won't go this way, but if you just go player by player and say best case scenario for every player, all of a sudden this team becomes really scary, pretty quickly, because the ceilings on players like Laine and even like Kirby Dach, if he stays healthy, Slafkovsky, like all of a sudden you could add 45 goals to this team just by doing that exercise, going down the list. And they won't be asking as much out of players like, Brendan Gallagher or Armia, Josh Anderson. So yeah, it's just going in the right direction. And I think it's a question on whether or not they're one of those teams like the Devils did, where they just kind of shot out of a cannon for that one season. And I do think New Jersey obviously had the higher upside like player like Hughes, than Suzuki. Like Suzuki kind of is like Nico Hischier in that situation. They don't have a Hughes ahead of him, but yeah, there's something to this team. Definitely a team that is going to be on the underdog list for us as we go through the season quite a bit, because I do think that they'll cause a ruckus when they're like plus 200. So that is the Atlantic Division. Nick likes the Maple Leafs to win it. We both are kind of in agreement about the Senators being a high upside bet. I don't think that the Sabres are a really bad bet either, just to win the division in some sort of parlay, which I'm going to build as these shows go on. So right now I got the Sabres at the top of that ticket. We'll move on to the Metro and continue with it, where I feel like it's a similar theme in the Metro, where a lot of the teams that finished or the two teams that finished at the top last year didn't necessarily get better. I think one got appreciably worse. The other one, I think, got a little bit worse. One team, of course, that being New Jersey, got a lot better. I think Washington got a lot more interesting, let's put it, more than anything else. The Penguins, who knows? Then you got a team like the Islanders, who I think could be flying under the radar a little bit, and maybe that's my bias showing. But let's go through it quickly here. The division odds. New Jersey is a favorite, plus 230. The Rangers are right behind them at plus 250. So are the Hurricanes at 250. Then it's a jump to the Isles at 12-1. Penguins 14-1. Capitals 18-1. Flyers are 20-1. And Columbus Blue Jackets are 150-1. For most of the summer, most books just had the Rangers, Hurricanes, and Devils listed as co-favorites, around like plus 250. The Devils, I think, are going to go off at most places as the outright favorite, but not by much, ahead of the Rangers, with the Hurricanes either tied or just slightly behind the Rangers. I'll put it this way, same with the Panthers. Like, I think the Devils, despite the down season last year, are 100% deserving of being an even shorter favorite than what they are right now. I think that they should be a little bit high. They should be a little bit shorter than these odds. I just don't think there's enough value. They're the best team in the division to me. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think they are the best team in the division, but the sports books are guarding pretty heavily against this. And even in the Jack Adams market, Keefe is a huge favorite there. So that really shows how they're kind of adjusting that market to what seems to be the winning combination, because he's a new coach of a team that is really going to be likely to bounce back. This roster still looks completely stacked. I think with Hamilton back in the mix, and now you got Markstrom in there, I think that they are really likely to be good. And I think are worth a bet to win the President's Trophy. There's still 12-1 out there. I think that the upside is definitely there. I feel pretty confident they can get in the mix. So I definitely prefer that over the division bet. I don't mind the division at all. They're, I think, kind of, for me, the clearest team in terms of the regular season. I don't know how much I love them to win the cup. I think there's something to be said a little bit for teams needing to get into the playoffs, learn to win. It feels like you always see one or two deeper runs before a team actually breaks through. So I kind of put them in that boat a little bit, maybe see how they're doing if they get there. But to start, I think that this is a President's Trophy winning team, at least upside wise.
Yeah. When your biggest concern is health, like, you're starting to nitpick a little bit because it's such an abstract thing, right? Hamilton coming off that big injury, he's had issues in the past, and of course Hughes, or I should say now the Hughes brothers both have now dealt with injuries. Luke Hughes is going to be sidelined for the first month or so of the season. Jack Hughes has missed at least 20 games in 2 of the last 3, but like, on paper, when healthy in a vacuum, I think that this is the best roster, 1 to 23, or however deep you want to go in the East. Like, I think that this team is quite good. And you brought up a really good point last season about President's Trophy bets. And one of the things that you need to win the President's Trophy is solid play from your backup goalie. I think the Jake Allen move last year is going to be sneaky important for this team for a number of reasons. One, because you can't rely on Jacob Markstrom to play 60 games and then need him in the playoffs. So I think they'll handle his workload pretty carefully. Two, it's a completely different setup for Markstrom. He was in Calgary for a bit. Then he was in Vancouver before that and out west. I know he played in Florida for a bit, but completely different environment for him. And three, like, Jacob Markstrom, for as good as his good seasons have been, like, he's had down years. Like, he kind of trades up good and bad years. So he's not someone that everybody can just write down in marker that he's going to be well above average goaltender. So I think Allen actually makes a huge difference for this team and is someone that, or is part of the reason why I understand why you'd want to back New Jersey in that market. But I'm with you. I think that if you do like New Jersey, the President's Trophy is probably the best way to go. You're getting double the price on that than you essentially are for Sheldon Keefe to win. Jack Adams, a lot of people are going to rush to bet, or have rushed to bet Jack Hughes to be the MVP. I think that's a little dangerous at the number. But like, as you said, the bookmakers have kind of guarded against New Jersey across the board through the division odds, Jack Adams, Markstrom, Vezina, and Hughes MVP. And they're really good, but there is something to be said about the fact that they did just have a really bad year last year. So we shall see. That brings us to the Rangers. Anything
Oh,
else?
yeah, and I was just going to say, I think, well, the last thing I'd say, a lot of people, I think, are probably going to look at it and say, how are they this much like they'd be this much better? But I think on top of the goaltending that just killed them last year, which they've upgraded a ton, the defense core can still be a lot better even than last year when they were had held pretty strong underlying numbers the whole year. Because I think you have to like the Pesciad, obviously healthy Hamilton, and then I think Nemec I really like. And I think part of the problem last year was Luke Hughes had too big of a role. I don't think he was playing nearly as well as he was getting credit for at times in the year. So I think there's a lot to like and to be said for the fact that they could defend drastically better in front of what should be a way better goaltending tandem. And then they just have so much talent in that top six. So I really, really like the Devils' outlook.
And I mentioned the thing about health. I think they're just much more protected against a situation where they lose Dougie Hamilton for 2 weeks now too. The Devils are deserving of their status 100%. The Rangers are the team right behind them, and on the betting board, they are the defending President's Trophy winners. They are plus 250 to win the Metro. They are a 13-1 shot to win the Stanley Cup. And to win the President's Trophy, to go back-to-back win the President's Trophy, they are 12-1. Like, the Rangers deserve a ton of credit for what they did last year. They were obviously quite good. They won the President's Trophy. But we did start to see in the playoffs, like, that over-reliance on things breaking their way, whether it be just a great power play and the goaltending, it caught up to them. And this team's not all that different you can make the argument that teams always do really well in their first season under Peter Laviolette, and then they take a step back. I don't know how much I buy into that narrative as much as some of the other stuff just regressing. And to the point about the backup goalie that I was making about Jake Allen last year, everybody, not just us, everybody thought that the decision to bring Jonathan Quick to New York was just a head scratching move for the Rangers. They had a great starting goalie in Igor Shesterkin. You think, all right, get just a stable, your stable run of the mill backup to take some of the load off him, and they go out and they get a 38-year-old Jonathan Quick who looked well past his prime. And what did he do? Well, he responded by posting a .911 save percentage and winning 18 of his 26 starts. Don't think that's going to happen again. I just don't. So I think you can kind of start taking away points from the Rangers in little areas, and they start to add up a little bit where maybe this team struggles to get to 100 points much more than they did last year. That's my overarching theme here. I'm not going to bet them to miss the playoffs or anything like that because I still think they have too much talent at the top of the roster, and the decor is deep, and they still have Igor. But I would, and I don't hear a lot of people saying oh, they're going to win the President's Trophy again. I do think they're a pretty trendy Stanley Cup pick, but I just don't think that they're going to be finding things as rosy in 2024-25.
Yeah, and I think they have had one of the things that will help people make their case if they want to bet an over on the Rangers is that how many points they have been averaging, but they have ran really good in terms of luck too. Maybe you want to say some of their guys, or I should say injury luck too, but you also could say that they're overachieving their expected wins a little bit, which maybe at how big of a sample it is of them winning this way, you kind of throw out the window a little more. But yeah, I agree. I think for me, even at 100.5, I'd lean towards the under just with how competitive the division's going to be. I think they're a little more in the pack than people think. And yeah, I would rather target them in some awards markets that we'll talk about in our awards preview.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't see it. They got out of the gate so hot last year too. So they never had any pressure on them. Well, if that doesn't happen again, how do you respond to having to really muck it up to fight for your playoff life? A little different. One team that had to do that, and people forget about it because of where they finished in the standings, was Carolina. They were, come Christmas, they were really struggling. Then they put together one of the best second halves in the NHL. They're plus 250 to win the division. They've been quite good for quite some time under Rod Brind'Amour. I do think it's fair to say that this roster has gotten worse on paper, and there are some actual legitimate questions to be asked of this team for the first time. And I don't even know if it's they lost Jake Gensel. They had Jake Gensel for half a season. I don't think that that's the big impact, but I think it's the middle six that concerns me more than just losing Gensel and not replacing him because, like I said, he wasn't there that long. Down the middle with Aho, you feel great about him as your number one center. Then it's Kotkaniemi, Jordan Staal, and Jack Drury, and maybe Drury steps up and wrestles that number 2 spot, or one of their young players that they've been touting for a while is able to settle in and bolster this top middle six. But looking around, Jack Roslovic, Jordan Martinook, Will Carrier with Marty Necas on the wings, it feels pretty ordinary, and you have to give this team credit for the way it's trended for a long time. But then when you pile that question up with, okay, maybe the blue line isn't as good either because they lost Pesce and Shea, and I think there's something to be said about it taking time for someone like Sean Walker to get used to the way the Hurricanes played. Shane Gostisbehere has been here before, so maybe a little bit less of a learning curve. But even the top 4 with Brent Burns is the way he's trending. Him and Slavin. Now Slavin's past 30. Orlov and Chatfield behind them, and then Gostisbehere and Walker. And then you compile that with the goaltending. I think with Freddie and Freddie Anderson and Kochetkov, I think is a question mark too. I think there's enough here to be a little bit skeptical about the Hurricanes and not just pencil them in for the usual stuff that they do. But you're still a believer here.
I am still a believer, and I don't even want to say. I mean, you look at it. I think this is one of the biggest gaps in like public perception compared to what the sports books are saying. They have a point total of 100.5. So some of the takes I'm seeing out there, people better be pounding that under because people are talking about them missing the playoffs. And I can see the case, but the reason I'm not with it is I think that Sean Walker's a great pickup. I think he can do a lot of what Pesci did. And I think Gostisbehere is going to be a great fit. So I don't think the decor has fallen off. I still think it's a strength. The center depth is concerning, but you still got Aho, a legit number one center. And I think Jordan Stahl obviously can be used as a good eraser to help anchor one line that can at least play head to head with your opponent's top line and do fairly well. So I like Carolina. I'm not saying bet them to win the division because I see the question marks. But the thing that I think is interesting that we'll throw out here that'll definitely be going in the awards is I think Brendan Moore to win the Jack Adams at 45-1 is a really good bet just because of how low the mainstream media seems to be on this team. Like I'm hearing so many people, and obviously that's a bit of a guess from myself, but I just think that at 45-1, I'm comfortable to make that guess that
Yeah.
if, especially given Brendan Moore's reputation of being such an excellent coach, which I think is well earned, that if this team doesn't fall off and they end up coming in right at 100 points, I think he can easily be right there in the Jack Adams race. So I think that's a good way to target Carolina kind of holding up and even just being as good as they have been. So yeah, that's the one bet I like involving the Canes.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? Because their over under is set at 100.5, like you said. So if that's to be believed, and you're believing in the efficiency of a betting market, which we do, um, that would dispel the narrative that this team is going to take a massive step back. I don't see them like bottoming out at all. I think that they're a team that's just built not to do that almost. Um, but I do have enough concerns that like I don't I think that this number is way too short on them to win the division. And if you do believe in them, like you said, I would go after the Jack Adams market with
Yeah.
Brendan Moore more than anything.
Yeah.
Because
Cause like the important note there is just that I think enough people do think the roster is
yeah,
so far off that he could get that credit. Like you look at the other coaches that are bottom of the Jack Adams odds, and it's like Montgomery, and Talkit. And I can see it. Like obviously, Vancouver basically runs it back, gets the same point total. Who's voting for Talkit? I can see that logic. I think that maybe people might not view it the same way with Brendan Moore here. So at 45 to
no,
1, I'm like at least willing to see if my logic makes sense here.
no, I'd agree with you. And I also think that there's compared to most years, there's not as many compelling narratives for coaches. Like we talked about how Keefe is the favorite, and we'll do much more of this with Jake on the award show. But usually there's like 6 or 7 guys where you can start writing down like their story, so to speak, and when you're handicapping the awards. And there aren't all that many that are as compelling as Brendan Moore, which is they lost a lot of talent. People are picking against them, and
Well,
he's
and they
definitely
really
one of them.
guarded against the stories more than ever. Because, like, from what I
Right.
paid attention to, it's been much more
I know.
like usually these are the Jack Adams odds are much closer to just whichever teams are going to
Your
be
team. Yeah.
good or
Right.
much more correlated with that. And now it's like clearly they put some stock into the narratives that actually win this award.
That brings us to the polarizing, boring, maniacal, however you want to call them, New York Islanders. They're 12-1 to win the division, hanging around 23-1 to win the conference. I I'm an Islander fan, and I do get carried away. I'll be the first to admit it, but I actually think that the Islanders are a decent bet to win the conference at 23-1. Just looking around their environment, I don't. I think that they're going to be underrated. I actually have a feeling that when a lot of modelers start coming out with like their season point totals and such, people are going to be like, "Wow, I can't believe they have the Islanders that high." But I think it's because a lot of people don't understand that this team has been decent despite a lot going against them in the past 2 years. They became the first team in the salary cap era to make the playoffs last year with the 32nd best with the worst penalty kill in the league. Um, so you'd expect that to get a little bit better. They changed up the coaching staff to address that need. They had Scott Mayfield miss half a season on the blue line. Adam Pelech and Ryan Pulock believe missed at least 26 games, so they never really had a top six play together. They never figured out the third man on the Horvat Barzal line. Now they have Anthony Duclair, and they made a coaching change, which had a pretty big impact in the middle of the year, where Patrick Waugh was able to lead them from a relative playoff long shot to making the playoffs, and they played right around 100-point pace, despite all that stuff. And Ilya Sorokin had a down year by his standards. I don't think he was like all that bad. People are painting him like he was a bad goalie, but he just wasn't as good as he was the previous year. He did have back surgery over the offseason, so we'll see, but they do have Semyon Varlamov right there. I believe that the Islanders are just going to be better. I think that the Islanders are going to be better than what everyone expects them. Everyone's going to expect them to be a 94-point team in a good year or a 90-point team in a bad year, trying to make the playoffs that way by just not losing. I think that this team can put 100 points in its sight. That's why I like the Patrick Waugh, Jack Adams at 30-1. I think that's fine. Like I think, plus 220 to get to 100 points. And if they do that, like, he's going to be in the mix. Let's talk about storylines, right? He's Patrick Waugh. He's a god up in Canada and in hockey circles. And I don't hate the conference look either, because I think kind of in a different way of look, like how you said about the Devils, maybe the team's just not built to weather a storm in the playoffs. I think the Islanders are in that regard. So I don't know. I think there's more upside here. It just won't jump off the page to anybody because they're looking at this team like they do the same thing every year, and I get that. But I think that there's a lot of noise in what they did last year that was pulling them back towards the pack than people realized.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, I'm a little lower on them than you here, but I do think that the Waugh bet is good. And I've if I had to bet, I think like 93 points, 94 points sneak in would be my best guess. I think that saying Duclair is like someone you're excited to have on your first line is a bit of a bold call based off where he's been and the way he's just kind of been.
Well, you got to look at who they had.
Right, I agree, but I think
thing, right?
If you're just gonna call out like some of the other top teams in the East and say that like you're excited to have him as a first line winger, that's maybe a stretch. And I just think the depth overall is a little weaker than where you probably have it, but goaltending's good, and I think that this can be a scrappy out. And I'm with you that this could be an annoying team to get out in the playoffs as well. So yeah, I like Waugh here, but aside from that, I kind of think this team's right in that bucket of teams for me that are just going to be right in the mix of a really competitive playoff race.
Now we get to the Penguins. I've been against them 2 years in a row. I'm starting to wonder if maybe we're going the wrong direction too far on them. They're 14-1 to win the division. They did not have much an offseason that would make you, all that confident. And you're banking on another 82-game season from Crosby and Malkin, Letang being healthy, a huge bounce back from Ryan Graves, Erik Karlsson continuing or being, I think he was fine last year, but being a little bit better than he was, and the goaltending with Jari and Nedeljkovic holding up. Like, you're starting, the list is long of things that you're like, of question marks, but I do think that the forward group is maybe a little bit better than people give it credit for. I think Crosby, Rust, Bunting, if Malkin can step back into like can have like a resurgent season, yeah, maybe that's a stretch, but and then you have like a bottom six that looks fine, like an good NHL bottom six, which I think is a lot better than what they've had in previous years. Yeah, it's not great, but I don't think that this is going to be a team that is out of the playoffs by the middle of February or anything like that, and a team that I'm going to look to bet on in the early going as an underdog, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that they're definitely right in the mix. They're one of the reasons I think teams like the Islanders, it's a little tough to think for sure they'll get in. I think that the defense core could be quietly a little bit better. I think we've seen the absolute worst of it from Ryan Graves. Now you should be able to stick him comfortably on the third pairing with Grzelcyk there, who I really like. So I think that if the defensive play should be a little better than it was. Analytically speaking, if you believe in that at all, this was a team that underperformed last season. They've kind of been in that boat a lot. So again, maybe they're kind of the opposite of like a Boston, where you're saying one of those teams is good at maximizing their points. One of these teams is kind of proving to be good at getting the least or leaving points on the table. But I think those are things to like. The concern for me that kind of prevents me from wanting to bet them to make the playoffs is that their stars are good enough to carry this team in the East. Crosby, Malkin, Russ, those guys. But also you're banking on some health where
Right.
some of those guys have been kind of injury prone in their careers and have almost gone backwards. They're playing whole seasons now or closer to whole seasons at like age 36, 37. So that's my concern. But I think the one point where I'm like a little in disagreement with maybe a lot of the public perception is, on the defense core. I think the defense core has the upside to be a pretty strong unit.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think it's just a team that I'm going to be looking at back in the game-to-game market quite a bit, which is going to be
I think there's a lot of that in the East too. Like that's the reality. I think there's a lot of teams in this kind of wild card mix where it's going to be really fun to see how they get started and how things go, but like not really interested in locking in season long bets on like leans at plus 120 and that sort of thing.
And I think the public perception of these teams is why I'm going in thinking I'll be able to scrap some value on a team like Pittsburgh on a nightly basis, at least in the early going, compared to, let's talk about the Capitals, who are the next team up on the division odds at just behind Pittsburgh at 18-1. Really, really interesting offseason for Washington. They make the Pierre-Luc Dubois bet. The Matt Roy signing, I think, was quite adept. Logan Thompson, it's quite fun too. You're a Capitals fan and you're a Calgary guy, and now you got a Calgary guy, right? He's from the area in Washington. Ovechkin, the Chase. They brought in Andrew Mangiapane as well, like Duhaime to play fourth line. Like there's a lot of different things going on here. Chikrin comes in. I think this is the hardest team to project in the Eastern Conference of all of them, because so much went right for the Capitals in terms of like getting points from crazy situation and getting into the playoffs with that goal difference. They got it seemed like the games that they lost, they got blown out, and the games that they won, they would try to keep every game to 2-1, 3-2, and if it didn't get there, it was like, oh well, like almost like a tennis player who loses the first 4 games of the set, and they're like, we'll try again tomorrow. I almost look at it though as a completely new team. Like I just want to like draw a line through all that we saw last year from this group and like just look at them, not take into consideration the goal difference regression or anything, because it feels just completely brand new. And with that being the case, like if you believe in Washington, this thing could work out really well. It could be gangbusters. Like they could, in a division where I think that New Jersey is clearing away the best team, but I don't think it's like the Metro of days of old, right? When you had Crosby, you had to beat Crosby's Penguins, Ovechkin's Capitals, Lundqvist's Rangers, and then like the Giroux Flyers to win the division. Like you're not really beating a huge cohort of elite teams. So I really don't hate a flyer on Washington to do something crazy here at all.
I don't, and I think there were some great numbers out there earlier in the summer, and I still think they're right there, but a lot of them, like right around the July 1st, there was like 350 to 1 to win the Presidents, 40 to 1 to win the division, and those are gone. I still agree with you. I think this team has a lot of upside. And they're almost like a supercharged version of last year, because I think the defense core should be so strong, and I think that they can really clean up points if they get a good 1A and 1A or 1B tandem with Thompson and Lindgren. So, I mean, that's the main case for the positives there. And then I think if PLD works out, there's I still think they're going to be a weaker offensive team for sure, but there's a world where they have a respectable offense. I think the way to target them, not to blow another award one, but the best one left, I still like Carberry. I think that he got Seward a little bit. I think he finished in the vote, 5th in the vote last year, which I get that a big part of that was people looking at the team and saying, all right, they snuck in with a historically bad goal differential. I think everyone was just like, why are they even here? But I think also people underrated that the roster he was working with for half the year was horrible. It was basically an AHL roster. They had half the AHL team up there at times. So I think he has a lot more to work with, which is probably the thing that people might be underrating a little. But with that said, it's hard to make a case for their top offensive stars versus essentially any of the teams competing in the East. So that's the tough point there. But I still think there's a little value in targeting them in the high upside markets just because the potential of having two really strong goaltenders and playing really good defense. So I think that's the way they're going to need to win games. And then the other fun flyer where it feels like this one's almost at a point where it's like odds makers taking a stand against the public a little bit, and there's no option on this. So who knows, that typically means it might not have the most value, but I'm looking at it as a fan and thinking Ovi to score 30 goals at -110. I think that he has so much more help now. Even though he's a year older, I still feel like the first half of last year was like the absolute bottom. He was snake bitten, wasn't playing well, wasn't getting any help. The fits weren't there. Kuznetsov, when he was with him, was one of the worst, everyday forwards in the league at that point. So I like the upside there. And then I think at plus 850, worth a shot to see if he can score 40. And which I will note, Bet365 has plus 850, and I think that's the best number on the board because there's sites offering comparable lines for him to break the record, which is obviously if you can choose between 40 and 43, pick 40. So if you can get that, I think that's the best number out there. Hopefully it'll be a fun sweat, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, there's something weird with this team, man. All right, the two teams at the foot or projected to be at the foot of the Metro are Philadelphia. They're 20-1 and Columbus at 150-1. We'll start with the Flyers. Crazy run last year, end up surprising everyone and then falling flat to miss the playoffs in that wild second to last game where Tortorella pulled the goalie, cost the Red Wings. It was what a night that was. Betting on the NHL. Philadelphia stuck to what it's been saying all along, which is that they're going to keep their foot off the pedal here and look towards the future, kind of like the opposite of the Predators who weren't able to remain patient. The Matt Michkov comes in. He bolsters the forward group. This team struggled to score. They had a terrible power play, but they've had a terrible power play for quite some time now. The goaltending for me is what makes me wonder if this thing can absolutely bottom out. We can see them finish at the bottom of the division, right? Sam Ersson was admirable in the situation he was thrust into last year, when Carter Hart was kicked out of the league, but he then just completely fell apart, and the Flyers just got nothing. They're bringing in Ivan Fedotov as well. He played 6 games. Very unfair to judge anything off of what we saw from him. Did he even play? I think he plays 6 periods, maybe. He played very little, is what all I'm trying to say. But they brought him over from Russia and with like a month left in the season to try to give Ersson a chance to take a breather. It obviously didn't work out. The blue line, a little concern here too with in front of them. York, Sanheim, Sealer, and Drysdale it could be a okay top 4 if things work out, but I just you're asking a lot of those guys. They should be responsible defensively. Perhaps that helps them. They're going to be the hardworking physical Flyers that we always see John Tortorella teams look like. But then there's questions down the middle, like is Sean Couturier just past it? He doesn't have much help. I think we all like Morgan Frost, but beyond him, it's like Scott Lawton and Ryan Poehling. I think there's a lot of question marks here, a lot more question marks than people want to admit to just because of what we saw from them last year. So I would ask you this. If the Flyers had a season kind of in line with their projections last year, what do you think their wooden spoon odds would be? Because right now I'm looking at 30-1, and I honestly don't think that that's a terrible bet. Because I think if they had a season where they finished at like 79 points last year, 77 points, whatever, this number, and maybe it's obvious to say, is slashed in half, and their expectations look a lot different. The problem with betting them to win the wooden spoon is you're betting against the John Tortorella team to finish last, which is tough.
Yeah, I don't mind the Flyers here either. They're kind of another one of these Eastern teams that out of the gates I'm expecting to be betting on, and I'm scared to fade. I think that the top 4 can be respectable. The big knock on them is obviously the goaltending, but we'll see. Ersson really fell off when they were asking the most of him, and the team's play fell off so bad at that point. That was right around, I remember there's that game in Montreal that was like 8-1, and they had the huge losing streak, and the team was just so bad. And I think they got a little deflated when Urson started struggling too. So we'll see. I'm kind of lukewarm on them as a team. I think that Frost and Michkov is a really solid tandem to try to target in fantasy. I think the one thing that they're like Buffalo, but even more so, going to need to sort out is the power play. And this is one of the reasons that I'm kind of high on Michkov, even though the expectations are starting to get pretty high. But over the last 3 years, the Flyers power play in 246 games is clicking at 13.4%.
Yeah.
So there should be no hard feelings telling some of these veterans that they can go on unit 2 or not going to get their power play time, and that Michkov should just get a full-time role on the half wall running the top unit. Hopefully with Frost out there too, who's kind of, it seemed like he got out of Tortorella's doghouse at the end of last year. So I think that that's obviously going to be one area they really need to bounce back. And I think they can bounce back there. I think the big question is just going to be, is the goaltending going to hold up at all? Which a lot of teams are in that boat. I feel like it's one of these things that it almost feels like such a cop-out to just say, well, we don't know what we're going to get out of the goaltending. But I think they're also like,
I feel like we do know though with them. Like when we're asking those questions, we're like, can Joseph Woll stay healthy? Like with these two guys, it's Ersson was okay, but I don't think either one of us are going to be like he's going to be blinders, right? Like
yes, but Fedotov did have enough of a profile that people, like there was people who had watched him and thought when he came over he could succeed. And he got in 3 games. I think it was 2 of those games they were absolutely terrible in front of him. So basically,
well, he got in that game, the Islander game, and he came in the middle of it, and I was scared shitless because
and
I
then
was like, great, now this guy's
game.
He played really well against the Islanders, though. I will say that. Like he played that game, he played really well. The Islanders won it in overtime, but he was good. So yeah, I mean, I think this one isn't as much. Like I'll put it this way: like I'd be surprised if Philadelphia's goaltending is like a net positive this season, because I view it as a big weakness for them going in.
Yes, that's fair.
That brings us to Columbus, who are 150-1 to win the division, and obviously had a absolutely tragic offseason, losing Johnny Gaudreau. We won't get too into that, but crushing stuff, and our hearts go out to them and the Blue Jackets and every team that the Gaudreaus had played for, teammates, family, friends, etc. Just looking at this team from a betting perspective, I do think that they are it's fair to put them in the spot as the projected to be the worst team in the division. I think 150-1 is fine number to like slap them with to win the division, because I do think that the question marks here, when you start to write down the questions that you have that need to go right for this team, they do start to pile up pretty quickly. But I will say this is another team, and we're maybe getting to the point where we're just saying a team that I want to bet on, because I think, and you were kind of leading the charge on this last year, like the forwards that they have, especially on the wings, and now with Fantilli in year 2, and hopefully Cole Sillinger and Kent Johnson start to step up a little bit more. Like the forward group is better than it looks or feels. The goaltending, who knows? The blue line, I think a lot of it comes down to just how good David Jiricek is. And if Zach Werenski could stay healthy, and we could see Severson and Damon Severson and Provorov have better years. But I think there's still more to this team than it looks on paper, is what I'm trying to say. And I do think that you can't just bet a team to be like scrappier than what the book says.
I mean, you could bet them to go over 68.5 points.
Yeah, but even that, like,
respectable, but probably not worth leaving in there for an entire year,
right? Exactly.
At minus 110, but yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I mean, who doesn't want to see this team come out and succeed right now? I think would be a really likable story for the fans with everything that's gone on. And obviously, they're another one of these teams that I think is in the boat of everything went wrong last year. Like every little thing. I think that first off, Vincent was a terrible coach. I think he did a terrible job with the young guys there. I think that's the biggest case for improvement, was just that there was no stability whatsoever. Like trying to keep up with what was, and it almost made them an interesting betting team because once some of those young guys started playing good and were bumping up and down the lineup, then there was some value there with them in certain props. But I think that he was working with more talent than people thought, and he was shuffling every single line every night. Every guy was changing positions every night. Like there was no continuity. So I think there's some good things to build off there. I think if Juricic gets a full-time role, maybe Merzlikins can bounce back a little more. Like I think there's some arguments in favor of Columbus and some of their young talents. I think they could have a quietly respectable top nine, which will be lacking some stars for sure. But I think this team could be one that gets you with depth. And I'm already looking at that like first night in Minnesota. They're I think plus 190, like just as an example. Yeah, I think this is a team I'm going to be wanting to try and get on at numbers like that early on.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I don't think we're going to be alone in that. Okay, that brings us to the end of our Eastern Conference preview. Kind of just to recap, and tell me if I'm missing anything. You like the Leafs to win the Atlantic at plus 280. You think the Sens are still a decent bet to make the playoffs. Once again, at even money or better. You like the Bruins to fall on their face and miss at plus 195, if I believe is the right
Yeah, I
price.
think there's still plus one. There's definitely plus 185s out there. I think there's still plus 195s as well.
Okay. We both like, if you want to put together a big punt on the Senators to go off, whether that's President's Trophy. You brought up amass 100 points. There you can bet markets like 110 plus 120 points. However you want to do that, we do think that team has some upside. I'm not there to bet it yet, but I do think that the Red Wings are on my list of. I want to bet one team from each conference to win the Wooden Spoon, have the worst record in the league. If I had to pick one from the Atlantic to put on consideration, to be the Red Wings. I do have some belief in the Sabres. I think the Sabres at 14-1 is an okay bet in the Atlantic. I'm going to use that as my long shot in a parlay. I'm putting them with the Devils at plus 230 for the first two legs. In the Metro, we both like the Blue Jackets early on in underdog prices. You think Alex Ovechkin at plus 850 to go over 40 goals, minus 110 over 30 goals, and you like the Devils to win the President's Trophy. We'll talk more about it, but Jack Adams guys, you like Rod Brendamore, you like Spencer Carberry. I like Patrick Waugh. You sort of half endorse that. And I
like Waugh. I'd give that a full endorsement.
He
And
gives
then
you
I
a
think
full
the other
endorsement.
one story that I missed from the list while we're on it too is I think Thompson 40 goals. Also, I dropped in there.
Yeah.
I think that's a good bet.
See, yeah, we'll talk about it more in the award show. I'll save it for that. I like the Islanders at 23-1 to win the Eastern Conference. I am an Islander fan, as I always say. And just generally speaking, general thoughts, I do think the market is a little bit low on Pittsburgh. And I think that Philadelphia is in consideration for a wooden spoon bet as well. So that does it for our Eastern preview. Like I said, we did record this on Monday, September the 23rd. You're hearing it likely on the Thursday or Friday after that. So we do apologize if anything significant has changed. Hopefully not. Be sure to listen to our upcoming previews on the Western Conference. We're trying to get Andy McNeil on for that one, but Nick and I will be there for that at least. And we also do an awards preview, which is, I think, my favorite of any season preview content that we do. We'll have Jake Hahn for that next week. So thank you for listening. Thank you to our producer, Noah. Welcome back to another season of Line Change. Please rate, review, and subscribe. It is very important for us as we enter a new season to get as many of those. I should have said that off the jump, but please, if you do have a second, just to leave a 5-star rating and a review. For Nick, I'm Michael. We'll talk to you soon.